All right, today we're going to talk a little bit about values. Values are one of the, what I've seen while I've been teaching, is values seem to be one of the most abused, kind of misunderstood aspects of painting and drawing. They're probably really right up there with some of the most important concepts that we need to grasp as we get good at the ability to spatially relate things and get things on a two-dimensional surface to look three-dimensional. I'll try to paint very, very simple analogies and explanations for these concepts, because one thing I've seen over all the books I've read and teachers I've studied with and things is a lot of times some of the concepts are explained in very, very complex means when they really don't need to be. I like to dumb things down and keep them in layman's terms, just very simple, very precise kind of analogies and things that allow people to understand these concepts without being too baffled by them. So values, how light or how dark something is. We're not talking anything other than just basically how this range, and when we do it, when we start, we like to think of it in a gray scale. And some scales are 0 being black and 10 being white, some are 10 being black and 0 being white. The way I always learned it was to think of 0 as being black and 10 being white. And we have a value scale, something like this. Now this is just a little kind of plastic one that came with some kit or something I had. I'm not sure exactly where I acquired this one. But this one, you can create your own. You can get them in any number of places online. You can print some out. You know, a lot of times when you're shooting photography of artwork and stuff, you'll have a little grayscale that's put next to the artwork when you're shooting it so that the printer can actually look at the value as well as the color scale next to it. But anyway, this is a little one that's got holes notched in it so that when you're painting in gouache or different things, you can kind of hold it up and look at the value in your reference and then look at the value in your painting. I don't want to get too into that. We're going to get into very more thorough explanations of value when we get into painting and other things, right? Right now, I'm going to do a couple little demonstrations kind of to show you how we use our pencil and how we equate value using our charcoal pencil the way we've sharpened it. Again, redundant for some of you, I'm sure. Many of you will say, oh, values, I've heard it, I've seen it, I've done it. Just bear with me and, you know, let's just go through it as a refresher for some of you. And for some others, maybe it's the first time you've ever really gotten a good explanation of what a value is and how you need to manipulate that. Everything you put down in paint or in drawing is going to have a value. And it's going to be somewhere in those extremes that we just talked about, somewhere between black and somewhere between white. When we're working on this surface, we're working on a slightly off-white surface. It's a little bit grayed. I would say on the scale of 0 to 10, 10 being white, this is maybe a 9 or an 8, 9 point something. It's very high key, it's up there. It's sufficient to use as our white. It's not a problem. We don't have to have a stark white surface to work on in order to get our full, you know, value renditions, okay? So what I'm going to do, talk a little bit about common issues in shading with the tool to get the proper value that you want. A lot of times I see that people just don't seem to use the pencil properly, okay? So we're in our positioning like we normally do. We relax like we always, you know, just kind of get yourself focused. And what we're going to do is start looking at, okay, the white of the paper is going to be obviously your lightest value you can get. The blackest you can get is something like that. That's the wonderful thing about this charcoal pencil also, is it'll go matte, flat black, which is nice, as opposed to graphite that gets really shiny when it goes really dark. And as you build that value chain up the scale, those jumps between values can be as intricate and can vary in incredible amounts of range as you work your way up the chain towards white. Now I'm just arbitrarily making these little strokes, getting lighter and lighter as we go down up the scale. You just want to play around with the pencil. You want to play around with just making little value charts for yourself, trying to get yourself to learn to control the pencil, okay? So when people shade with this, a lot of times what I see them doing is they shade really fast and scratchy and back and forth trying to fill in an area. That is not what I'd like to see you doing. I'm a huge fan. People like Henrik Klee, Joseph Clement Cole, a lot of linear draftsmen, a lot of linear artists. But this is not the place for us to work with that kind of concept yet. Okay, we'll get to that in later stages of calligraphy and things of that sort. But right now, we're just talking about simple values. So one thing I'd like you to do is, number one, have a well-sharpened pencil, as we always have talked about and we will continue to talk about. And we want to kind of try to work in the middle value range, somewhere around value number 5. So on this scale here, we want to be somewhere in this range of values when we're drawing. We don't want to be up in here or down in here, whichever we want to look at it. We don't want to really be up here where we can't see anything. We don't want to be down here where we put the lines in so dark that when we go to erase them, we can't get them out of the nap of the paper, and we always have a remnant of the line. So when you're drawing, you have to control the value with which you put down your lines, and I would like that value to stay somewhere in that 5 range, maybe 6 range. A little bit lighter would not be a bad call. And so what I see a lot of people doing is scratching. So what I like to do is, when you shade, I want you to shade down, lift the pencil, go back up, down, lift the pencil, go back up, down, down. Now when I'm shading in a large area, it looks like I'm just going back and forth, like that. I'm down, lifting it, going up, down, lifting it, going up, and it's almost like you're petting the paper, and my hand is staying on the paper all the time, like we've always talked about. Don't want to hover. Don't want to hover and try to shade. You're going to break your tip, you're going to break your pencil, you're going to wear your shoulder out. It's not going to be conducive to long hours of studying like you're going to want to put in. Okay, so downstroke shading, you can choke up on the pencil and just kind of brush at it that way. But what I'd like you to try to do while you're laying in your tone is to continue to brush and twist the pencil a little bit. Twist the pencil a little bit each time with your downstroke, so that you're literally sharpening the pencil on the surface of the paper. This is an incredibly fine paper, but it still is like a very, very, very high numbered sanding paper. It's not, and that's why the smoothness print is so much better than the rough. The rough is like a really kind of more coarse sandpaper. Not only does it file down your pencils really quick, but it has these little kind of dimples and puckers in the paper where you have to try to get the tone down into it. That means you got to smear with your finger, you got to use a chamois, you got to try to get on the tip to get it down in there. Eats your pencils up fast and doesn't allow you to put down smooth gradated tones very efficiently. So we stay away from the rough newsprint and rougher papers because of that. Later, when you get into heavy technique driven exercises, those papers can be kind of fun to work on. So again, I'm not here really to be dogmatic about these approaches and tell you, you have to do it this way, you have to use these materials. I'm just simply suggesting that to get the most out of what we're trying to accomplish, let's use the best, most efficient, cheapest papers and pencils that we can use, materials, but not sacrificing quality for cheapness, okay? We don't want to get there, we don't want to go there, and we'll get that into paints, we'll really get into that, brushes, things of that sort. So, small strokes, again, if you're working in small areas, you can kind of wisp at it. A lot of times you'll hear me kind of wisping at the paper. The thing that a lot of people commonly do is they'll put a stroke in, they're filling in an area, let's say the side of a face or something, and then they'll, accidentally pushed too hard and it went dark. Okay, so now they try to fill it in. Went a little dark. Next thing you know, you've got this like really stark dark patch on somebody's face or on the side of a body. You're not controlling the application or the pressure sensitivity of your tool. You're allowing your hand to push too hard, too quick, too early, and it's causing blotchiness in the drawing. And that blotchiness doesn't look good on a drawing. So what you want is cleanliness. So what you want to do is try to stay with your pressure sensitivity. Now this is preparing you again for painting. It's a great exercise. So what I want you to do, again, to practice values, is do little value scales. Stay away from the scratchiness. Try to shade on the downstroke. Try to brush the tone on a little bit as you're shading. Now, as you get really advanced in this technique, you will be able to shade more back and forth a little bit, but I don't want you to do that yet. Refrain from that. Refrain from that. Downstroke up, slightly petting the paper with the charcoal and twisting the pencil a little bit as you go so that you're constantly sharpening that pencil, okay? You also want to create little shapes and fill them in. So again, like we talked about, practicing your ovals, practicing your shapes. You could sit and draw an oval, different ovals as you warm up before you start, practicing a head or a figure or from some photo reference or something. You can do little freehand boxes, just little perspective boxes that you kind of create. You can create little cones. We'll get into more of this in another lesson when we start talking about geometric shapes, breaking down complicated form, and shading geometric shapes and whatnot as we get into more advanced exercises. Then you can go in and practice shading these forms. Again, look at how I'm just kind of slowly and methodically filling in the side. One thing you want to also avoid is taking your finger and using it constantly to smooth out your tone. That's going to cause, well, what it causes when you're drawing figures and heads, you start smudging too much and it starts to get this kind of really syrupy looking, kind of sugary looking look to it, which I can't really explain it. I mean, those are probably bad terms to explain it, but then you start pulling your erasers, highlights out and stuff, and the person looks like they're made out of plastic or metal, like Silver Surfer or something. It looks really weird. So I like the organic, slight textural grittiness of manual shading. Do I shade with my finger? Occasionally. Yes. Do I shade with it ridiculous amounts? Not often. But again, when I tell you these rules, they're not meant to be, set in concrete. Yes, you'll occasionally use your finger for certain glazing methods and things, and maybe even a little chamois or something. But again, what I'm trying to say is most of the time, you want to try to accomplish your smooth shading with manual shading, not with not with your finger. So do the majority of the blending, and try to just get a disciplined hand to be able to fill in shapes and be able to really control the pencil. It'll be, again, part of your training, and you just have to be patient with yourself. And it's not easy to shade in large areas cleanly. I mean, it took me a long time to get good at that. And I know a lot of students that are especially really intellectual and intelligent have a very difficult time dealing with the fact that they can't do something so simple. And don't take it personally. This is not an onslaught or an insult to your intelligence. This is just manual dexterity, the ability to manipulate a tool, and not many of us in our common everyday lives are required to use dexterity to the degree that we're going to ask you. What I like to liken it to, I always tell people you need to develop a surgeon's hand, okay? A hand that's like a surgeon, with the pressure sensitivity, the ability to manipulate tools to a very, very fine level without being jittery, jumpy. You might have to watch the caffeine that you drink. Too much coffee can cause problems with pressure sensitivity, creating too dark of tones because you're pushing too hard because you're really wired up and juiced up on coffee and caffeine and Red Bulls, whatever. Try to stay away from that if you're going to be drawing. Maybe cut back on your caffeine intake a couple hours before class. Maybe 3 or 4 hours before you go into class or something. Maybe have it in the morning, but don't, Anyway, you can work around that. I'm just kind of throwing it out there maybe. Some people just have a tendency to have jittery hands. Doesn't mean you can't draw and paint well. One of my instructors has an incredibly jittery hand and has managed to become a phenomenal draftsman and painter. You just find ways to work around it, So the big thing right now is getting used to this idea that we have values that we have to work with. We have to put down the proper tone with the proper value, ultimately creating a rendition of a figure, a landscape, a person, a still life that represents the value that we observe. We'll get into manipulating values, punching up values, playing down values, and just the manipulation of values to get a better impact or a better excitement out of your drawings and paintings. But that's going to be a little more advanced. Right now, we're just talking about the essentials, and this will be best suited for obviously people that are just getting into this as a refresher on values, on edges, on shapes, on how we use the tools, and how we use this little crafty pencil. But be patient with this little guy. It's so worth mastering, but it's going to take you a lot of time, okay? A lot of time. So don't think of this as an immediate gratification technique that you're just going to pick up the pencil, learn how to sharpen it, and you're on your way. It's going to take months, you know. I've noticed that, and again, not to deter you or to frustrate you, but I mean, it took me years, you know, years, and I took 8 to 10 classes a week, 3 hours a pop from models with good teachers. And I would like to think of myself as a fairly intelligent individual. You know, I don't think I'm going to break any records, but at the same time, I mean, I have an incredible appreciation and ability to do huge amounts of repetitious training and enjoy it. I really want you to fall in love with the repetition that's needed, and that's my job. I'm going to try to be a good coach for you. I'm going to try to get you pumped up to do the things that you're not normally going to want to do and that you're normally going to want to glaze over and get into color and all the fun stuff. We got to back you off, and we got to get you to get that foundation solid. You can't get into the color. Everyone always blames color. Oh, my color's so bad. It's usually their values, their shapes, their edges, their calligraphy, their design, the placement of what they're doing. Those are where the problems usually originate, and then people blame color, you know? So let's just be patient. We're going to get to color down the road, but let's take our time and let's work our way through values and all these wonderful methods. And I trust me, if you can master this, you will be so happy, and so you will learn to love drawing. You will enjoy it as much as painting or more sometimes. So that's our little lecture on values. We'll get into more complicated expansion of this knowledge as we get into more complicated techniques. Okay? See you soon.